Hey, what's up, guys? It's Michael from The Honest Youth Pastor. What you are about to view is a small section of a podcast that's part of a much longer podcast that me and my friend Rob do for the Babbling Pastor podcast. And in this particular podcast, we talk about resting and how it applies to pastors, how to section off that time, and what that looks like. So hopefully you find this first part helpful. If you want the full thing before it comes out to everyone else, it is now available for the Patreons on our Patreon community. Link will be in the description. But if not, watch this short section, and I hope you find it helpful. Hey guys, I'm sorry. That sounds like the beginning of an Eminem album. Hey guys, real Slim Shady. All right, welcome to the Babbling podcast. Welcome to the Babbling Pastor podcast. I am Michael, and this is
Rob. I'm Rob.
There you go. If you're not awake, you are now. Welcome, Rob, to the Babbling Pastor podcast. Today we are going. I don't know why I'm welcoming you. You're always here. Welcoming to the people.
Well,
that
I almost wasn't.
Well, people don't know the behind the scenes of all of this. They just think we wake up, we look amazing like this, and we just hop in, guns blazing.
Yeah. It took me a long time to get all this in order, and
yes, the Babbling Pastor podcast brought to you by Beard. There's like beard products, right? I don't know any of them.
Cream stuff.
Brought to you by Beard Cream Stuff.
LLC.
Yeah, because it could make your beard fall out, and you'll be don't blame us. So, today on the Babbling Pastor podcast, actually this episode that will be broken up into other mini episodes, we're going to talk about rest and the importance of rest specifically as a pastor. We'll probably get into it just in general, but I definitely want to come at it at the approach of rest for a pastor, the importance of rest for a pastor, what that looks like. Because Rob, you just got back from a conference that I'm incredibly jealous that you were able to attend and I was not. But let's talk through that a little bit. How does rest look for you in regards to things like conferences and whatnot? You want to talk about that?
Well, so yes, I did just get back from the G3 conference, and I know that you were jealous of that. So it is a restful thing for us, but it's at the same time, like, it's not, and I don't necessarily think that it's meant to be this, but it's also not like it's not meant to be a just restful retreat getaway only. It's a space that God has blessed us and our church. And I've told you this, our church sets aside a certain amount of dollars to help send us to a conference every year, and whatever that might be. And this year, that's what we ended up doing, and those are really, really, really good. But they're also really meant to be more of like us getting fire hosed and poured into, if that makes sense. So like we're drinking from a fire hose for 2.5 days. And so it's not necessarily the same thing as like sitting on the beach and taking my Bible in slowly and thinking and meditating on those particular scriptures and having nothing else. So that's not the same thing. But but I do think that this conference thing, it really does play into the whole deal, because it's a time of, like, every week the people in our church and other churches typically get to be there and be poured into by the word, and I spend all week preparing to pour that out. And so for us to get to go to a conference is actually really beneficial and helpful for that purpose, because we get to trade places, kind of. So yeah, that was really good. I will tell you that at the end of it, we needed to come home and rest. So, but
Yeah, well, it gets to the point. Yeah, there gets to a point where you're like, oh, this was fun, but now I'm exhausted, and so I need to go kind of decompress a little bit from all of the things that I just experienced. And I think to kind of kick off this whole the importance of rest, specifically on pastors and what that looks like, I guess we'll start off with that. Conferences, I think, are a really good example of that because most pastors, like you said, are all week long getting ready to pour into their congregation. They've poured over a message. They've really dug in, and that part doesn't necessarily, unless you have maybe a mentor pastor that you're with every week. And even in that, it's not necessarily like you getting poured into like with a whole bunch of stuff all at once. Where a conference is more like I'll put it this way: most pastors, hopefully, are like super Bible geeks, and they like a conference like what you're talking that you guys went to is like Comic-Con for a pastor in regards to being like, hey, there's that person, hey, I listened to this podcast, or I watch these people online, or hey, I've seen them do some really cool stuff and I want to talk to them. And so in that regard, like you said, it's not restful in regards to like, oh, I'm just chilling and I don't have to be at a certain place at a certain time, but it's really invigorating in a whole different way to where it's like, hey, I'm getting poured into, but I'm also interacting with a whole bunch of other people that have the same sort of interests as me, that are geeking out about the same stuff, that are like, they want to talk about the same stuff I want to talk about. And so in that way, it's really invigorating. And I think when we're talking about rest, sometimes, whether it be pastors or anybody else, I think sometimes we're thinking about, hey, I'm just going to lay on the couch all week and I'm going to veg out and do nothing. But rest, I think, comes in a lot of different ways. That's one of them. But let's be honest, that gets boring after a while. Like after a while, you're like a day in, you're like, all right, cool. I've done nothing for a day. I need to do something. And I think rest, when we look at it, especially for the thing your church does for pastors, I think is great. It purposely sets aside some funds to say, hey, thank you for doing what you do. We want to do something for you. Go to this place and, get poured into, get, geek out with other people that are like, that are geeking out about stuff that we're not going to be able to provide you with that. And so I think rest, not, sometimes we're like, oh, go off on a retreat, go to a B&B. Okay, cool. How about like go dive into the deep end theologically with a bunch of other people that are interested in the same thing you are.
Yeah, I would say if you're going to do the like typical vacation thing, and to do the rest deal, it at least needs to be guided or planned in some way. Like the interaction that you're going to have with the Lord during that time, and with your family needs to be if you're going to actually be able to say, I really was able to rest, then it needs to be something that at least for me, it needs to be something that is planned. So what I mean by that is like, I'm not just going to go through my continue to go through my regular reading plan, for instance, or something like that. I'm going to be really intentional about something specific, like maybe just studying resting in Christ, or dependence on God, and something like that. So here, a ironic example, right? It's possibly providential, that the whole theme for the G3 conference was the sovereignty of God, right? Which allows me to rest as a pastor, right? Like understanding that actually everything is under control and he doesn't need you. Like, it's not that kind of relationship, right? It's not as if you're like, if you don't pull every hair out of your head this week, you haven't done enough and people might go to hell because of your decisions, right? Like at the end of the day, he's in control of it. And I think when I was Um, Two things. When I was first stepping into this role, I think the one of the, if not the main major thing that I took away from the guy who retired, Jeff, who retired from the role, he was still my mentor, um, is his belief in the sovereignty of God. You could tell wasn't just something that he said, like he was very patient because he just figured, well, God's gonna do this or he's not, and so that kind of uh that is so freeing for uh a pastor. um and so that's the one thing, right? Like just actual belief and trust in that sovereignty of God, right? That he actually has a plan, and you're involved. Thank God that he's invited you in to do that and to take part and to be blessed in that way. But he doesn't need you. Like, at the same time, like, this, it's not how this works, right? So I'm allowed to do that, and even should do that, uh, if I'm going to be worth use at all, right? At sometimes. So, and then secondly, I think our church actually believes in this so much. I might get in trouble for this because it's not. Um, this
Oh,
hasn't been like this hasn't been okayed or anything yet. So this is still hypothetical at this point, but our church believes in this so much. The elders believe in this so much. This sending me away to this kind of thing, that I requested that line item um, be uh, utilized elsewhere this coming year in 2024. I requested that I would just be able to use that money to help take my family on a mission trip that we're going to do as a church. Um, and a couple of the guys, I mean, in passing, were kind of like, okay, and then at the next elder meeting that we had, one of the guys just said, okay, I say we just do both. Um, because I think that there's a recognition that, like, that actually is a healthy thing every year. Even if it doesn't have to be the G3 national conference, right? Like, that's like that's the place everybody goes. You know what I mean? But just a place where you can go and get poured into, um, and not do the pouring out. And I mean, I know we're talking about pastors, right? But you're as busy as me, for sure. And it's ministry's fault, right? I mean, so it's not the exact same thing, but it's pretty doggone similar.
yeah, well, and I think so. I mean, talking about rest and planning things like this. So there's going to be a lot of people that watch this that are not in ministry. So I think that's a good sort of divergence. So first, I do want to say that if you are a pastor and you're watching this, or if you are in a leadership position at your church watching this, it would be, I mean, and you don't have something like what Rob's talking about here. Like, so as far as setting aside funds to say, hey, pastor, go get poured into, go forgive this, whatever thing you want to be a part of to do that, give them the opportunity for that. Because there's two things. And I think just from, I mean, you can probably talk about this from before you were in a full-time ministry position, but I can definitely talk about this from outside of a full-time ministry position. Pastors feel
Yeah.
guilty about taking this time to do that because especially if they are the lead pastor, the only one that like is getting the calls all the time. And so if you're that guy, a lot of pastors I talk to are like, well, I can't really take a week to do this because who's going to do all the visiting? Who's going to do this, that, or the other thing? Most of the time they can get somebody to fill in. That's not the issue. It's like all of the actual work behind the scenes. Because I mean, hey, big surprise for some of you guys that are watching or listening. Most churches don't function as they're supposed to, really, as far as deacons and having elders there to do those things. Unfortunately, a lot of churches, a lot of the people I talk to, so many of them, the pastors are burnt out because they don't have an established biblical setup of deacons and elders and how this is actually supposed to work. So they're burnt out and they don't feel like they can take a week. So if you're in a church like that and you're not a pastor listening and you have some sort of leadership or have somebody's ear, I would highly suggest putting that bug in somebody's ear and saying, hey, do we have something for our pastor so that he can get away or him and his family can get away? That's not just like, hey, go take a vacation, buddy. Like, do we provide the funds to assist in that? Because again, maybe not a big surprise to everybody, pastors don't get paid a whole bunch most of the time. And finding those funds to do that can be hard for them. I mean, paying for tickets to a conference like G3 or anything else is not cheap. Hotel, airfare, ticket costs, all this adds up. And most of the time, the pastor, on top of feeling guilty to go, has to budget that on top of everything else. So again, just a bug out in everybody's ear. If your church does not have that sort of thing, perhaps think about it. And then that could open a whole other can of words as far as, do you have people in positions to actually assist your pastor or not so that he can do that? And if it's a no, maybe you need to have those discussions too. So anyway, so from that side of it, I just wanted to put that out there. But yeah, from just a non-pastoral perspective of resting and having rest and giving yourself that, you have to, and this goes for pastors or lay people, you have to know how big your plate is. I mean, you're talking about being busy, right? So there's things that my plate is X amount big. I don't even think I've told you this. There's more that's come on the plate because my wife got injured. So now it's like she's down a little bit and I'm having to pick up some stuff. And so you have to, as a person, either be a pastor or a lay person, rearrange some things based on what you can do so that you have rest, so that you don't get burnt out. And there's some things you got to take off and some things you don't, because if you don't prioritize the things in your life, something is going to fall off and something's not going to work well, and you're going to get burnt out, and you're going to quit stuff that you probably shouldn't quit because you just haven't prioritized well. And I think on the list of all the things, so we're talking about having rest, usually rest is at the bottom. It does not get prioritized. It's the first thing that people are like, well, I don't need to do that because I was just going to just chill. So I'll put that off and I'll do this other important thing. And I don't think we really realize that from Genesis, we have God setting aside a time of saying, no, don't do anything, because you need that time to not, like, you need to recuperate. You need to rest. You cannot go 24/7 all the time and think that that's going to be a healthy way to live. And so I think whether it be pastors or lay people, like you're talking about, recognize when you get busy and say, what do I need to cut off? And where's that list? And there's some things recently, a lot of different things, a handful of things that are either have happened or are possibly going to happen, where we've had to sit down as a family and say, okay, if this happens, what goes first? Like, what gets off the plate? Because this all can't be on the plate at the same time. So what are the things that we need to prioritize so we can still rest, so we can still be healthy, so we don't get burnt out? Because the fastest way, and maybe you can probably talk to this from the pastoral position, but the fastest way to get burnt out in ministry or in other things is not having that plan. And so when something or two things or three things happen all at once, you get overwhelmed, and then you just don't know what to do and you shut down. And I think that's why going back to what you're talking about as far as funds set aside for your pastor to do that is helpful, because if you're not leading well as a pastor, if you're stressed out as a pastor, that's going to go down into every different ministry in the church. That's going to be present in your sermons. That's going to be like, it's just, everything's going to break down if you're not rested and have that time, just like in anybody else's life. They don't prioritize that as well. And so, yeah, it's just like, as people in a modern world where we can easily try to like multitask everything all the time, you have to realize that you have to have rest. And if you cut that thing off first, everything else falls apart. Hey guys, you made it all the way to the end of this particular section of the podcast. If you found that helpful, or you know somebody that might need to hear it, go ahead and hit that share button, that like button. And if you enjoyed it or didn't enjoy it, either way, leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. And we'll talk to you next week.